My name is Stephen Smiley. I'm the branch secretary in Unison South Lanarkshire. I'm a member of Unison's NEC and Scottish committee, and I've been asked to chair tonight's meeting. So I'm very pleased to do that, and I'll explain in a minute why I was asked to, and the campaign that the workers there are engaged on in order to create a future for their factory. Like many groups of workers where the boss comes, they just become another set of statistics as the factory gets closed. We've got a history in Scotland of workers who decided in some other circumstances to try and resist that. Places like Caterpillar, Lee Jeans, Plessy, where workers occupied their factory and tried to resist the closure to some extent, some with success, some not successful. And similarly, workers in Florence decided to do something similar, and they occupied the factory, refusing to accept that they would just be another set of statistics in the deindustrialisation or the pursuit of profit for a big a company like GKN. But they did more than that. Not only did they occupy the factory, they started a plan to change the nature of the factory and start thinking about a plan for the future. And instead of being part of the problems which contribute to climate change, auto parts were all part of the motor industry, they came up with a plan based upon producing environmentally friendly goods, which we'll hear a bit more about. But cargo bikes and solar panels are part of that plan. So as a trade unionist, the fact that they decided to fight, they decided to occupy was inspiration enough. But we're deciding to pulling together a plan and taking that plan not just to the workers in the factory, but the surrounding community, the wider trade union movement, the environmental movement, and internationally reaching out for support. And it's a story which is inspiring many people, and that's what we're here to discuss tonight. And we'll get some presentations about it. The reason why I'm chairing this is that one of the things that they asked to do is they asked people, trade union branches or organisations, to support them by taking out a share in the company, the workers' cooperative company that they were setting up. And my branch, Unison in South Lanarkshire, and indeed my colleague Stuart, who's on the call from the Glasgow Unison, Glasgow City branch, both branches decided that we would answer that call, and so we've taken out shares in the company in order to, as an act of solidarity and a support for the struggle of the workers to create a future. So that's why I'm here, and I'm delighted to be able to chair it. Before I introduce the two main speakers tonight, just to quickly clarify that this meeting will run to about 9 o'clock. We'll finish at 9 o'clock. Or earlier if we run out of things to say, but we're not going to go beyond 9 o'clock. We've all got other things we can be doing. It is being recorded. The speakers will be recorded and will then later on be put on the website of the Edinburgh Climate Coalition, who've organised this meeting in the first place. And if when we get to, we'll have a Q&A later on, so we'll all take questions. If you want to, you can put your questions in the chat, and that allows us to see what kind of questions are coming. But when we get to that, we'll look at the chat, but people can put their hand up in the usual Zoom way of finding which icon you have to press to put your hand up, and then we'll take speakers from that. So that's the format for tonight's meeting. I'm very pleased to welcome everybody to it. I'm sure it's going to be a really interesting meeting. We're going to start off with showing a couple of films, and then Matthew and Brona will speak to it. So I'll introduce Matthew and Brona just now, and that will save me doing it later on. Matthew is an old colleague of mine from Unison, and currently in the Just Transition partnership. He's a climate activist, an active member of the Edinburgh Climate Coalition for Friends of the Earth Scotland, and is secretary of the Just Transition Partnership involving the STU, Friends of the Earth Scotland, and a number of trade unions. So and Matthew was able to go to Florence. I think he was technically there on his holidays, but he took some time out to go to the Workers' Assembly meeting, which we'll hear a bit about later on. Brona, who thankfully joined us despite some technical difficulties. Brona's been working on local democracy, local assemblies and community projects for several years, co-founded the Enough Collective, which explored the relationship between climate, economy and politics at a grassroots level. She recently completed a master's thesis exploring how urban climate plans are shaping and changing urban governance. That sounds like a good topic for a future Zoom meeting later on as well. So we're very pleased that Matthew and Brona was also able to get to Florence to attend the Workers Collective, and that's Matthew and Brona are giving us a report from that. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Matthew and Brona, and they'll introduce the films. So take it away.
Thank you very much, Stephen, for that great intro. I feel I've got a bit less to say now you've said all that. First of all, we're going to show you a couple of video clips. They're made by Real News videos, and essentially give you a brilliant feel for the character of this struggle, and they give you a lot of information so we don't have to cover it. So the first one was made almost a year ago. So when it says something about the timing, just bear in mind it's a year old. And the first, it's going to be about 4 or 5 minutes. It actually sets out the story. And then the second one, which Luke, you can just go straight on to, is more recent, and it gives us a bit more up to date information. So first of all, you won't hear from us, but enjoy these quick clips. And I'm going to post the link to Real News, so you can see there are like at least 3 videos, all really worth watching. So you can check those out separately. Thanks. Go for it, Luke.
In 2018, the speculative financial fund Melrose bought the GKN group. The Melrose founders got this slogan, to buy, to improve, to sell. We knew that meant job cuts and other plans of shutting down plants. They did it in GKN in Birmingham, in Mosel, in the East Germany. 9 July 21, basically we were all fired by mail. Since now are more than 2 years that we are in a permanent assembly. The factory has been saved and guarded and preserved by the same workers. The first stage between July 21 and September 21 was against the redundancies. When we were fired, Confindustria, the industrial owner association, said, well, you have wanted the ecological transition and now you have to accept job cuts in GKN and other automotive factory. When we called for a demonstration in September 21 in Florence, where there were 40,000 people participating, we succeeded in making the companies to retire the redundancies, but then we entered into a limbo because the company didn't bring back the work. Basically, we stayed in this factory abandoned by the capital. All the machineries with everything inside. A factory that is a new factory where have been done a lot of investments in the last decade. After 2 weeks, there was a demonstration with 50,000 people participating in Milan for the climate camp. We went there and we find a climate movement with ears very open to our position and that immediately support us. From that moment, we created a connection with the climate movement in order to build an alternative to this vacuum. Opened completely the discussion about, okay, what do we produce and why we shouldn't restart the production in an ecological way. We presented the first industrial plan in December 21, explaining how it was possible to create an industry of public means of transport a new private owner came. He promised to bring new investors, something that didn't happen. We suspect that it was a trick since the very first moment, just to take time in order to wait the struggle to die for tiredness. 8 months of this new owner, in August 22, it was clear that there was no real will to reindustrialize the factory, so we produced our own industrial plan. We formed a social mutual aid workers association in order to have a link between the surrounding citizens and the factory, in order to help each other, and in order to start some kind of self-production plan to restart the work. The answer of the ownership was to stop to pay any kind of wages. So we stayed from October 22 to July 23 without the payment of any kind of wages. We are workers under contract. We cannot even appeal for unemployment benefits. A lot of people were forced to resign, to look for other jobs. Now we are 200, we were 400 when we started this struggle, but we also had our social mutual aid cash that we created in order at least to give assistance to the ones of us that didn't have, for example, another wage at home. And now we have made this new industrial plan based on the ideas of producing cargo bikes on one end and on the other end to produce solar panel.
Abbiamo quindi questo progetto di reindustrializzazione che guarda alle energie rinnovabili, alla transizione ecologica e alla mobilità leggera, che sono dei pannelli fotovoltaici e cargo bike, che sono biciclette speciali con la pedalata assistita, possono portare di peso dai 70 ai 100 kg. Quindi in un progetto veramente tutto verde che è riciclabile quasi al 100%.
Vogliamo che impattino su una rete di piccole cooperative di delivery etico che usa le nostre cargo bike. Dall'altro lato vogliamo che i pannelli fotovoltaici impattino sullo sviluppo delle comunità energetiche e della cosiddetta democrazia energetica.
E quell'idea lì ci è venuta per il semplice motivo che noi eravamo contaminati della presenza delle forze ambientaliste.
Il nostro si è fatto una convergenza con Friday for Future.
Quindi quando a un certo punto la produzione capitalista non è riniziata come prima, il fatto che loro fossero lì con la nostra lotta ha permesso di aprire la discussione sulla transizione ecologica. Noi ancora non abbiamo vinto, tanti lavoratori sono alla fame, tanti se ne sono andati per disperazione, però è anche vero che siamo tutti consapevoli, la società è consapevole che quello che è già stato fatto finora è incredibile.
Siamo tutti GKN! Siamo tutti GKN!
La manifestazione del 18 maggio a Firenze è stata importante nei numeri, noi abbiamo stimato ci fossero 10.000 persone. Non è la manifestazione più grossa che abbiamo fatto, ma sicuramente una delle più significative proprio per il livello di grossa difficoltà e di stanchezza in cui eravamo. Questo ci ha dato una nuova trend ascendente, per cui abbiamo iniziato l'occupazione della regione.
Poi le tende si sono spostate in centro a Firenze per avere più visibilità ed è iniziato lo sciopero della fame di 3 operai GKN.
Per forzare il tempo e per spiegare che loro usano il tempo contro di noi, allora noi ci mettiamo in sciopero della fame per dimostrare quanto questo tempo sia usato contro i nostri corpi.
Lo sciopero della fame è andato avanti 13 giorni, al 9° giorno uno dei nostri si è sentito male perché gli si è alzata la pressione minima e ha cominciato ad avere delle palpitazioni, quindi è stato portato all'ospedale Noi abbiamo continuato lo sciopero della fame.
Le rivendicazioni erano le stesse che sono state portate durante gli ultimi mesi di vertenza, gli stipendi prima di tutto, il commissariamento di GKN da parte del governo e l'approvazione della legge regionale per la creazione di un consorzio pubblico.
Queste tre rivendicazioni sembravano fantascienza quando abbiamo iniziato questa lotta, ma ci sono delle significative crepe nel fronte opposto. Primo, la Regione ha stanziato 3.000 euro per far passare l'estate a lavoratori senza stipendio e questo ci dà del tempo. Secondo, si parla pubblicamente e chiaramente della possibilità del commissariamento e del fatto che potrebbe andare bene anche alle attuali istituzioni, ma che bisogna trovare le norme tecniche per farlo. E terzo, la legge regionale è attualmente in discussione presso il Consiglio regionale.
Abbiamo vinto anche sul piano legale perché dei ricorsi che erano stati fatti contro la proprietà, contro Borgomeo, che rivendicavano il fatto che i lavoratori e le lavoratrici hanno diritto a uno stipendio, sono stati vinte alcune cause individuali.
Quindi la sensazione è che proprio quando la notte sembrava più buia, in realtà si iniziano a vedere un po' di segnali dell'alba.
Thank you, Luke. Excellent. I think you can see why we thought that, you know, you get a better feel from the videos and us just talking, even if we have got some PowerPoint slides. So our contribution is to obviously add our own experiences, go in there, give you an update from the assembly we attended and what's happened since then, and to reflect on what we've learned and what these struggles might tell us in Scotland. So I'm now going to do my best to share the slides, which I hope I can do. Yeah, from the beginning, except I've got to go, yeah. Right, so that's just the starting slide. There's some banners and part of the delegation. This was essentially the people from Britain, from the UK, who attended, and there's me over there, and I don't know where Brona is either. But that's the starting point. This is at the site. So what I'll talk about is what we found and what we heard. We were part of that delegation, and we were and there were people from quite a few other countries as well. Obviously, Italy in large number, but from Germany, from Holland, from the Basque Country, ones that come to my mind. It was a very diverse. We were actually on this site, and it's an industrial factory on an industrial estate, dual carriageways next to it, etc. And we were all outside it, was sort of looming behind us with this big empty factory, which could have been employing this workforce for years. On the first day, I'm going to have to rush because there's so much to get through. On the first day, there was an assembly, which was co-organised by Fridays for the Future, called a Public Assembly on Convergence with the Climate Movement. And we heard from the climate movement and trade unionists within Italy. We heard people from other countries as well. There was a particularly impressive example of this kind of cooperation between the two movements from Fridays for the Future in Germany, who had made a determined plan to reach out to transport unions who were initially entirely unreceptive, and they were really successful, and they transformed. They then started. In the end, they were campaigning with transport unions around just transition issues. I think I'll just say this because there's a lot to get through. Just a few points from that session from me. While it's great to see climate activists supporting a trade union struggle, and individual activists within the trade unions who are people on our delegation really passionate about it. This is really impressive because, as you saw from the clips, this was trade unionists in struggle reaching out to the climate movement. It's like a very, very self-conscious process of saying, let's broaden our alliances. And we need to note that. We're going to move on to the second day, because the second day was for those people who had offered to buy shares, and it was a report from the collective on where they had got to. And also it was basically a sort of an opening up of the discussion and an appeal for agreement on the way forward. And well, I first of all say a really strong sense of frustration from the collective that they have this brilliant plan, they've worked it out, they've got a workforce, they've potentially got a factory. Obviously, they can't do it all themselves, but they're not really getting the support which is necessary from, for example, local government and or national government. And so, if you look at the question of when could they start production, the really central question now is: will the local government, the region of Tuscany, come in either to buy the site or to provide another site and to provide basically the sort of working capital to get going? I just reflect on this. One of the things which was really striking is obviously the framing around climate friendly or sort of green production, but it's also about reindustrialization. It's about saying, look, we're losing industrial jobs in Italy. We need to reverse that trend and not sort of have the basically we've seen a whole lot more of that in Scotland. But a really passionate caring about not just having a job, but what do you do in that job? How do you want to work? How do you want to live? There's some brilliant quotes, but one of the things about what I take from this is like a really imaginative and passionate expression of the issues from within the collective. So I haven't got time to give them to you, but we can find them and you can hear them on the clips. So what they did at that session was basically set a deadline to say, unless the regional government passes this law, as they call it, or basically makes a decision to support them within the next month, i.e. up to the middle of November, they would basically reconvene to decide whether to sort of not give up the struggle, but to give up this plan. And there was a motion which we all passed, laying the basis for that, but also showing how, if they were able to start production and they were starting to make it surplus, how they would use that to build a bottom-up economy. To as I think you might have seen in the clip, it's about not just making things, but through making them, like the cargo bikes, helping change happen in a bottom-up way in communities and so on. So just my quick reflections on this. Very impressive levels of energy, very sort of impressive engagements in political thought, imagination. Clearly reflecting that it's moved from an industrial dispute, which was you have an employer and you're in dispute with the employer, to a political struggle, an attempt to get the regional council to support it, an attempt to kickstart a collectively owned economy. Just to be clear, there are still a core of the original workers left, but they would be, looking at recruiting new workers if they were successful. Very quickly, I'm going to sort of make a few points about what reflections that brings me to in relation to conclusions and stuff about Scotland. Absolute precondition of this happening at all was very strong workplace organisation. It didn't happen to a bunch of people who suddenly thought, oh, what should we do? It happened to a really well organised workplace with really politically conscious and independent-minded leadership. The capacity of that to reach out has shown the tremendous potential of this alliance which we're trying to create between workers and climate activists and environmental movement, as you saw from all the kind of the videos of the mobilizations in Italy. You have to question these issues around the level of official support, not only from local government, but I think probably from their union as well. But obviously the support from other movements and from around the world has been tremendous. So just in relation to Scotland, it obviously shows us that how important it is to think ahead in terms of planning and strategy for any particular workforce in a factory or a plant or an industry which is vulnerable to change, whether it's from adjusting to climate change or just being bought up and sold on. So we've done some of that in Scotland, but what we've not seen yet is that level of activity within a plant or from the grassroots. And so, this is a space to discuss whether we can find places to support that. And clearly, you know, in the back of all our, in the front of most of our minds is the challenge at Grangemouth and the closure which is happening there, and the challenge to government and to the movement as to whether there can be a just transition for the workers. And more generally, how do we develop a worker-led just transition in Scotland? There's a lot to think about. There's not very much time for me to speak. I think that's my 10 minutes up. So, oh, I should have been going through these slides, shouldn't I? And I should have. I've got to get to actually, are you going to speak to this one?
So I wonder if what we do, Matthew, I've been figuring out how to structure this. If I speak to what happened, just to update people where we got to in November,
yeah.
what's currently happening, then I can just lead into the reflections that I have. And then we can show what we have as slide number 4, which are the direct asks and the things that the collective are looking for, and what we could do if we finish on that slide. So
we're going to this. You'll stick on this slide, then I'll skip forward. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So like, bear with us, folks. This is a little bit of DIY improvisation in terms of how we're moving through these. So yeah, so Matthew was saying we were there in October. We were fully expecting some sort of decision there, but because of the relationship with the municipality and not quite having decisions finalized, they agreed to kind of like push forward for another month. So in November, another 1 or 2 of the delegation went from the UK, but certainly not as big. And I would say that we are kind of going through a lot of stuff that's translated. So not fully sure necessarily of all the ins and outs and the practicalities if we've got everything 100% right. But this is our best understanding. And they had this sense of what they've agreed to do is resist the winter and take the spring. They didn't get concrete approval from the municipality, but 104 workers decided to keep fighting and basically to use the winter to plan and build. They talked about the development of a winter plan, which they just had this lovely language around kind of developing a campaign of mutualism. I think they've learned that the factory property itself has been sold. So that kind of creates a challenge in terms of they either need to fight to bring it into public administration, or they're going to need to find somewhere else to do the production. I think they talk about in one of those videos the regional government law. They're trying to like force the government to become to step in as a public intervention to manage the factory and then let the workers run it. They have achieved a degree of that, which they have described as science fiction. So I think it's really important to say it was actually quite a significant win. They have forced the government to do something, but it isn't strong enough. So again, they kind of need to keep pushing. And so what they've agreed to do is kind of work through the winter and meet again in March and April 2025 and take another decision on whether or not to continue. And then Matthew, if you go on to the next slide. And I think what's really important to kind of notice or to kind of learn from this is at the same time as this has been happening, the struggle has spread. And this is one of the things that the collective are trying to like catalyze really and kind of like encourage people to think about. Workers in Tuscany and Bologna have also set up collectives in their factories based on the GKN model. So this means that it's collectives that run alongside the existing union infrastructure. It's a more rank and file movement, essentially described as a worker-led strike committee, but functioning even when there isn't a strike happening. And they're fundraising to kind of create a rank and file strike fund. So that is kind of also happening at this moment. And then if we skip that, great. And so I think Matthew and I kind of cover similar-ish territory, but maybe with a slightly different emphasis. So apologies if you've heard some of this already. I think one of the things that I really took from it was this sense that they moved from quite a defensive tactic of occupation. We want to defend our plant, we want to defend our jobs, to really spearheading this very visionary plan for reindustrialization. They didn't know that they were going to do this when they started. And so it was just recognizing that that is something like they have evolved with the struggle and the struggle has evolved them, which is like, yeah, I think a point I'll pick up later on. As Matthew was saying, I think it's really important to note that this was largely able to happen because it was a pre-existing rank and file orientation. They took the initiative, they led the way. The CGIL union that they're affiliated to does support them, but hasn't overly lent a lot of resources, hasn't hasn't done huge amounts, although they kind of lend public support. And I think kind of when we left them in October, I think there was a sense of like, oh my God, that's it. We're not going to be able to do this. And what they were kind of saying to us was, whatever happens, they want people to take this forward. Like the next phase of the struggle for them is actually that people take this forward in their own ways and then in their own contexts. Obviously, they've decided to keep fight, but I still think that's the same message. I think they want people to know that it's possible and that they don't need to wait for kind of leadership to come from somewhere else. Next slide, please. This photo was taken under incredible duress. Greta and Dario, one of the delegation that we were with, kind of like got them for a photograph. They really didn't want to have it taken, but Greta was there, which really speaks to this idea of like they really want to be a catalyst for the convergence of struggles. I think it came through in the video. I think Matthew has touched on this. The GKN workers have been very clear from the beginning that this is a fight for more than just their jobs. They are fighting for all the workers in Italy who are experiencing deindustrialization, all the workers in the world. And they're really trying to hold a bigger intention around, and I think this is kind of their words, kind of having this transition from below to move away from an economy based on extraction, exploitation, and war, and based on a convergence of struggles. I think really importantly, this isn't just talk or rhetoric. They have been modeling practical solidarity and how they organize the entire way through this. They have had trans activists on their stages at their rallies, very clearly upfront in quite a marginalized struggle. Like in the UK, it's divisive. They have 100% stood on their principles. They work closely with refugee and asylum seeker groups. On our second night there, the last night of the assembly, we went and supported some striking workers, migrant workers in a textile factory, and so we lent our support there. So there is a sense for them that this is really about how our struggles come together and how we can lend support. And of course, like in a very material way, additionally, they're calling for this eco-social assembly. What actually happened in day one was they put the proposal, should we have this assembly? And then lots of people said, yes, 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 we should. So now the idea is to have this assembly. And like our best read of what they're kind of trying to say with an eco-social assembly is that it's like a movement building moment, a kind of sense of how do we converge all the struggles to really build strategies, to really read the moment and like work together to figure out some plans. And again, slightly with that recognition of maybe the places we keep looking to aren't going to be the places that sort of leadership is coming from. I think one of the things that I really took from it, like I think a few people were really describing like a similar experience of a left, which is fractured, a bit lost, disorganized, kind of similar experiences to here in many ways. And their sense of like, no, we need new organizing strategies, we need new tactics, and we need to be creating the spaces for that to happen ourselves. And so I think that's some of what they were kind of starting to get at with this idea of an eco-social assembly. Next slide. Sorry if I'm going too fast. They also, I think there was something really beautiful for me in how they're choosing to fight. So they're building as they fight. It's really clear that they have this kind of like qualitative practice and feel of mutualism, reciprocity, and the centrality of arts and culture in this. So yeah, and how they're organizing and struggling, they are modeling alternative ways of organizing, and they are building new infrastructure as they go. So the food co-op supported Give Food when the workers were striking. With the popular shareholder offering, they've shown it's possible to raise like a not an insignificant amount of capital through alternative means. They've established a society for mutual aid to ensure that they can start looking after each other. Art, music, and culture have been central, and I think you get that in the videos. The poster is a poster for a working class literature festival, which the collective have organized for years. So pre-existing to this, one of the things they did was like host a festival for working class literature, and it's a key part of what they do. So it's very integrated into how they understand themselves. It's a key part of how they struggle. I think for me, that's really important for two reasons. One is it's also like they were quite explicit on the second day. This has really taken their toll on a lot of people physically, mentally, emotionally. So some of the sense of relationship and I'm going to say the word joy, but art, culture, music, I think they're important to kind of build that sense of like resilience, grit, determination. There's something I want to stay in for. And they also have a kind of bigger goal when they're talking about becoming a socially integrated factory. this sense, and there's a lovely phrase in one of the videos, to organize not only how we work, which is through the factory, but how we live as a community. And so they're really like, they want the community to be in the factory and the factory to be in the community. And again, that feels quite like we've lost a lot of that in Scotland, certainly in terms of where workers and workplaces were and their role in communities recently. I think I've only got 2 more slides. I'm really sorry, folks. I think the other thing that really came through for me was that they were learning by they were doing. I mean, yes, we need to develop plans, but they started and they didn't know what they were doing. So like just this sense of like, we don't need to wait for leadership or expecting that it's going to come from elsewhere, assuming that others are going to know best, assuming that other people have the right information. Like, you know, I don't think that's the case.
That was a mistake, sorry, I don't know how to go back. Sorry, how do I get back?
I think you just...
There you go. There you
Matthew was saying they had to learn, they were a bit humble and had to learn from the climate movement. They didn't know much about ecological transition, but likewise, the climate movement has really had to learn about the central role that workers need to play in any sort of transition from below. They learned how to do the business plan themselves. They learned how to do industrial plans themselves. So there wasn't this sense of like this expertise that they had already, that they knew that they had. They had to learn it as they were going. And I think what they say is, we didn't start out with this plan and then try to insert it somewhere. We learned how to do all of this by choosing to fight. And I think that, again, I think that this is like a moment. And then this is my last slide. And this is definitely a personal reflection that I took from it, although I think it was kind of, for me, it came through quite clearly. There can be no just transition that doesn't include arms and weapons manufacturing. There was a really strong anti-militarism position by the workers and in calls for the Eco-Social Assembly. So it is part of their politics there. I think to kind of make clear why that would be the case is, you know, arms and weapons are both massive users of fossil fuels and cause a huge amount of ecological devastation. Like, they are one of the more harmful industries in the world, if nothing else. They are, like, it is an uncomfortable truth, but key means by which countries are going to either secure oil or lithium or whatever transition material they need. It has been historically and is currently proving to be through degrees of force and military power. And so an assessment of the current moment, which we all have by looking at the news and seeing what's happening, and the GKN workers kind of name this kind of as a war economy, like an honest assessment of what that is and what's happening right now indicates that unless we develop transition plans for arms and weapons manufacturing, any just transition for energy workers alone or for that sector alone is going to be a fairly hollow win. GKN workers fight for everybody, and I think so must be.
Is there's no more. That's brilliant, thank you. But I was just going to slip back then to this slide. Sorry, I didn't mean to say that. It sounded that way. It was great. Sorry. So we'll just finish this up before you get a chance to ask questions. Is just on what can be done now, and I think the key thing is probably the first one, to donate. And this is not the shareholder offering. This is just to give money to the collective so that they can support any of their members who are in hardship. And there's the information. It's also on the their website called Insorgiamo, which I'll post in the chat. They are asking people to put in orders for their cargo bikes. They're not in full production yet, but they see them, you know, producing prototypes as a sort of an act of solidarity and a way of spreading knowledge of what they're trying to do. I think we have to be clear that if we did put in orders for cargo bikes, we would probably have to go and get them at the moment. But that's not, you know, let's say there were 10, we wanted 10, we could get a van and drive it over. That's an option for people to think about. Messages of support are important. This doesn't mention the shareholding thing, just to cover that, because it was in the chat. Yes, Rona said they exceeded their target in raising that money over €1 million, I think. But they basically, this is, I think, what Stephen's branch and Stuart's branch have done is said, we stand ready to buy this 500 euro shareholding when you call on it. And that, I think we can still offer to do that, but it's not a priority for them at the moment, as I understand it, pending their sort of development of their plan. I think a lot of can be done by spreading the word, using this example. And as you can see, there's loads of videos, loads of material to use for doing that. And if we can take it to places where it has a resonance, that would be great. As Rona says here, get inspired and do something. And building solidarity between the workers' movement and the climate movement is something we do pragmatically and practically, but we should use this example in demonstrating what the potential is of that kind of thinking. So that's our bit, I think, Rona.